Welcome. Today we are doing a presentation on the 10 plagues of Rome, more commonly known as the Cyprian Plague. This was a horror birthed from Ethiopia that devoured the Roman Empire from 249 to 262 AD. It was thought by the pagans to be the wrath of Olympus because of the existence of Christians, and alternatively it was believed by the Christians to be the vengeance of God upon the Romans for their persecution of them. The Cyprian Plague was betwixt a series of mounting calamities known as the 3rd century crisis, a nightmare that the Romans would never fully recover from. It was a convergence of events that decimated the Roman economy. Firstly, endless numbers of migrants and barbarians invasions poured into the Roman Empire from the north. Secondly, the period of 235 AD to 284 AD saw warring generals continuously usurping one another in a time of civil war to become emperor. Right? This period is known as the time of the barracks emperors. It would bring constant civil war and military coups that just damaged civil infrastructure and caused unstable leadership in a time of crisis. To place this on full display, the average lifespan of an emperor during this time was 2 years. That's it. It only lasted 2 years, on average, before the next guy would come and cut that guy's throat and then take the throne. Over and over and over again. Amidst all of this, in 249 AD, the Cyprian Plague began its rapacious spread across the empire. The following year, the Roman general Decian defeated the Roman Emperor Philip in battle and seized the throne. Perhaps to ward off this plague, he is going to command all within the empire, besides the Jews, to sacrifice an animal to the Roman gods and provide documented proof of the act. The Christians are going to refuse to do this because, well, of course they are. They're not supposed to sacrifice animals, and they're certainly not going to sacrifice it right to other gods or to the emperor himself, who believes himself to be a god. Many Christians are going to die. This is going to kick off the 6th instance of Christian persecution in the Roman Empire. Pope Fabian, the Bishop of Antioch, and the Bishop of Jerusalem were all put to death for refusal to sacrifice animals to the Roman gods. After Decian's death in 251 AD, the new Emperor Valerian would again demand the Christians to make animal sacrifices to the gods. The failure of the Christians to do this is going to kick off another genocide. Now, why are they asking the Christians to do this? Well, the sacrifices, right, these empire-wide sacrifices are meant to appease the gods and ward off the plague. And the Christians aren't doing it, which is making them the target of the wrath of the emperor and of the people in general. It's going to lead to a tremendous genocide. Valerian ordered the execution of the Christian clergy. It's going to see the deaths of Pope Sixtus II and other notable Christians such as St. Prudent, St. Lawrence, St. Cyprian, St. Romanus Osirius, St. Pontius, and the list goes on and on and on of these innocent individuals that are going to be martyred for being Christian and refusing to make the sacrifices to the emperor. Valerian would confiscate all property of Christians if they refused to convert. They were tortured, and they were exterminated if they refused to convert. Amidst all of this, Christians were the subject of vile disinformation, and most insidiously, they were blamed by the public for being the cause of the plague. This poisonous disinformation, in addition to the execution by government, would lead to mob murders of Christians on the streets. Because of the Christians, my opponents say, the gods inflict upon us all calamities, and ruin is brought on our crops by the heavenly deities. That mandatory sacrifices were ordered by the emperors Decian and Valerian to stay the plague is near certainty, right? So the Cyprian plague ultimately becomes the cause of large-scale persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. Orosius is going to report vengeance for the violation of the Christian name spread out, and where the edicts of Decius for the destruction of churches circulated. To those places a pestilence of incredible diseases extended. Almost no Roman province, no city, no house existed which was not seized by that general pestilence and laid bare. All right, so he's, of course, saying this is all happening because of you're persecuting us. God is bringing wrath upon you. You are being smote because of this. But it's also giving us a description that every Roman province is being affected by this, and a ton of people are dying. Arnobius, who is a Christian apologist, is going to write in 303 AD that a plague was brought upon the world after the Christian religion came into the world, and after it revealed the mysteries of hidden truth. But pestilences, say my opponents, and droughts, wars, famines, locusts, mice, and hailstones, and other hurtful things, by which the property of men is assailed, the gods bring upon us, incensed as they are by your wrongdoings and by your transgressions. So he's saying that why are you all blaming the Christians for everything? Valerian, who's going around executing all the Christians, is befittingly himself going to be executed. In the Roman war with Persia, Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur, who personally oversaw his execution. According to different sources, Valerian was either flayed to death or executed by being forced to drink molten gold as a punishment for his greed. Upon his successor, Gallienus halted Christian persecution. Now, we don't know what disease the Cyprian plague was. Some may say it was hemorrhagic fever, others might say smallpox. It's unknown. In fact, we don't even know the scale of what the plague was, except that we know that it wiped out towns, right, and cleared households of their inhabitants. Suffice to say, what our best guess is it killed at least 10% of the population, and in the millions of people. Whilst the disease that ravaged the Roman Empire is still unidentified, the Bishop Cyprian, who's also actually later executed by the Romans for his being Christian, would provide us with a description of the disease, and is for that reason historians most unfortunately named the plague after him. If we are ever in a time of plague, I will not be describing it for fear that it might be named after me. This trial, that now the bowels relaxed into a constant flux, discharged the bodily strength, that a fire originated in the marrow ferments into the wounds of the fauces, that the intestines are shaken with a continual vomiting, that the eyes are on fire with the injected blood, that in some cases the feet or some parts of the limbs are taken off by the contagion of diseased putrefaction, that from the weakness arising by the maiming and the loss of the body, either the gait is enfeebled, or the hearing is obstructed, or the sight darkened, is profitable as proof of faith. This actually sounds a lot like very similar to the symptoms sufferers were going through during the plague of Athens. The Romans are going to attempt to stay this unknown terror in the usual manner, with empire-wide sacrifices and prayers to the gods. But also, they're going to attempt to cleanse their society of Christians, right, to end the plague. Their desperation, according to the 4th century Christian author Orosius, even devolved into the sacrifice of a child hermaphrodite whose unusual existence was scapegoated and then thrown into the sea by order of the haruspice, right, which are Roman priests. He may be borrowing this story actually from an instance where a child sacrifice of a hermaphrodite infant occurred in 142 BC in Rome as a means to stay plague. So he may just be repeating the story and adding it to this plague. So the haruspices may or may not have ordered the death of a child. The emperor had certainly ordered the deaths of the Christians. The oracles and the sibyls had, right, demanded animal sacrifice. even the Vestal virgins, right, are gonna suffer here, because the Vestal virgin Caparonia but is going to betray her vow of chastity and was ordered put to death for this. All right. The Romans had long had genocidal tendencies, right? But the fact that this is occurring here in this time shows that just how desperate people had become. Fear of the other, right, had arose, and they were willing to scapegoat and blame a different religion and attempt to purge their society of them. But what's interesting is that none of the killings of all the animals or of humans seem to elicit salvation from the gods of Olympus, as plague continued to reduce men to corpses. There was a remarkable and noted difference between how Romans and Christians reacted to the plague. According to several accounts, including the Christian Eusebius, they, the Christians, took up the bodies of the saints with their open hands, and on their bosoms cleaned their eyes and closed their mouths, carried them on their shoulders and composed their limbs, embraced, clung to them, and prepared them decently with washings and garments, and ere long they themselves shared in receiving the same of blues. So the Christians were taking care of the sick, giving them a proper burial, and in turn they too died of it. Those that survived always following those before them. Among the heathen, it was the direct reverse. They both repelled those who began to be sick and avoided their dearest friends. They would cast them out into the roads half dead, or throw them when dead without burial, shunning any communication and participation in death, which it was possible to avoid by every precaution and care. So, the Romans are taking the typical approach of not wanting to catch this contagion and contract it themselves, and they're using every precaution they can. The Christians are doing the opposite, right? They are saying, I must do good, I must care to these people who are in need, it is my religion that commands me to do this, damn what happens to me, I must do good regardless, right? They're not, this kind of mindset, or especially of early Christianity, they're not thinking about this life, they're thinking about the next one, right? And they're focused on that. It's very noble, but foolish as well, right? Because it would cost them their lives, and probably the lives of many other people. But it was certainly, their behavior was very admired during the time when they would do that, care for the sick and bury the dead. With such a prolific plague, many contemporaries believe this to be the end of Rome, and many Christians, the end of the world. One such belief is reflected in the 13th book of the Sibyl, written between 264 and 267 AD, which is going to prophesize the end of Rome. Down shall the ruler of the Italians fall, and the ranks smitten by gleaming iron, and close upon him shall his children perish. But when another king of Rome shall reign, then also to the Romans there shall come unstable nations. On the walls of Rome destructive Ares with his bastard son. Then also shall be famines, pestilence, and mighty thunderbolts, and dreadful wars, and anarchy in cities suddenly. This new book of the Sibyl was not only a proclamation of the apocalypse, as the heavily persecuted Christians believed that this plague was very likely the events of Revelation unfolding. Another contemporary or post-plague belief illustrated by Rosius was that this was indeed the 10 plagues of Rome. That this is God smiting the Romans for the genocide of the Christian people. While the account is written sometime in like the 4th century AD, it also includes a lot of like details, reuses the things based on the 10 plagues of Egypt, that Exodus account. It has details such as flies, dog flies that plague people during this time. In addition, earthquakes, hail, and of course plague are present in the account of what he believes are the 10 plagues of Rome. None of these apocalyptic beliefs are wrong, right? The Romans did indeed suffer greatly. There were indeed many calamities at the time. And while this was not the apocalypse, it was apocalyptic by any measure. But something surprising is happened during the midst of the Cyprian Plague. For all the persecution, for all the execution and the genocide, Christian religion survived. Not only that, but the empire-wide sacrifices and prayers to the gods of Olympus had failed to stay the plague. The failure of the gods to save Rome awakened many to the possibility that the gods of Olympus may not actually be real. Christianity, despite the genocide, had not only survived, but was rapidly growing. The economic devastation from plague amongst seemingly endless imperial coups, combined with war, plague, and climate change during the time, was immense. It is believed that the enormous city of Alexandria that boasted a population of 500,000 people was reduced to 190,000 during the plague. Now, whether it be a flight, running from the city to avoid the plague, or it's from death, 62% of the population of Alexandria has disappeared. Here a description on this matter. The very heart of this city is more desolate and impassable than that vast and trackless desert which the Israelites traversed in 2 generations. Right, so it's desolate. The city has gone quiet. Here's another lamentation here. Plague also then befell the land, starting from Ethiopia and spreading over almost every land, both east and west, and lasting for 15 years, denuded many cities of their inhabitants. With the citizens of Rome being devoured by the plague, it is no surprise that legions needed to win wars against invaders were also profoundly affected. There was such a great plague throughout the whole world that the Roman Empire was reduced almost to extinction. The death of so many was followed by the predictable yet unfortunate trend of immense economic problems. The Greenland Ice Core project, once again, as it did in our last video, shows us a large dip in the lead pollution or mining production, just as it did in the Antonine Plague. Like the Antonine Plague, right, this dip, and we're actually going to have to combine everything, right? The warring generals, the constant overthrowing of the government, the barbarian invasions from the north, the immigration crisis occurring from the north as well. But all of those combined is going to cause mining and lead pollution, and thus mining, to be reduced by an astonishing 57% during this time. This curtailment of mining is going to go along with an enormous debasement of the Roman currency, right? It's the denarii is going to become extinct, right? It's replaced by the antonines, a coin which had significantly less silver. It was supposed to be worth 2 denarii. It was actually only worth 1.5 denarii, right? So they have debased their coinage incredibly. And it's going to eventually get to the point by 268 AD, where there is almost nothing. There's almost no silver within the coins themselves. The price of goods is going to escalate by 100% or 10 times. This in turn led to the abandoning of monies and resorted to the bartering with goods, right? So that's how they've abandoned money. That's how bad the economy's gotten here. It is basically a near complete destruction of the monetary economy. This debasement of the currency in conjunction with massive inflation is going to cause the government to increase taxes on an already destitute population to make up for that lost income. interest rates, things like that, have been inflated dramatically. The cost of living would have increased. It would have become unlivable, right? It's going to be so colossal in size, this calamity, that it's going to reorder Roman society. Food, due to scarcity, had become so important that it was no longer those in the city, but the land-owning elite of plantations or estates that held power. In addition, poverty produced by this catastrophe was now so rampant that it produced the origins of serfdom. Many were reduced to such poverty that they gave up their rights as free citizens and tenant farmers to become a new class of people. Right? Formerly it's called the colony, more or less. They're going to join the ranks of what was already established, the colony, but the terms are going to be different, and they're going to be essentially serfs that are going to work on agricultural estates. It's going to say a lot that so many would give up their freedom in exchange to work on the land of a noble, right? It just speaks of how monumental this economic destitution was, right? So it's gotten to the point, it's gotten so bad that these people are unable to afford to buy food. They don't own land themselves. And they have chosen to give up their freedom in order to not starve to death. Basically, is they have said, I will be your colony, I will be your serf, I will give up my freedom, and I will help you work on your estate, and you will feed me, and I will live. And I would rather live than, I would rather give up my freedom than die, is what's occurring. The ancient world at this time was in its death throes. What we knew of Rome is dying. It is choking. It is choking and suffocating on itself. And the birth of a new age, the so-called Dark Ages, is quickly coming to replace it. It is going to descend and extinguish this light of Rome in the West. Now, we cannot say how much of this debacle can be contributed to the plague, as many of these forces were all occurring at once, all these calamities occurring at once. But what can be said is that through a combination of non-stop military coups and civil war, foreign invasions, plague, and climate change is going to forever alter the destiny of Rome's Western Empire and thus the future of Europe. It's not going to be many decades later. In 313 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great would convert to Christianity. And in 330 AD, he would move the capital of the Roman Empire from withering Rome to the flourishing Greek or eastern part of the empire. The city of Byzantium would be renamed Constantinople and become the new heart of an Eastern Roman Empire that would endure for another 1,000 years. In 380 AD, Emperor Theodosius would officially change the religion of the empire to that of Christianity, and roughly 100 years later, Rome would be sacked and conquered by the Germans in 476 AD. So a little over 100 years after the events of the Cyprian Plague, the Olympian religion has fallen out of favor, and it is Christianity that is now the official state religion of the empire, what's left of it. It is, without a doubt, the Cyprian Plague, the catalyst for the downfall of the Olympian religion, and a big one for the rise of Christianity. Now, this Rome that had fallen in 476 AD, this lost Western Empire, would not so easily be forgotten. Emperor Justinian lived between 527 and 565 AD, coveted the West. Filled with the imperial glory of old, he would sacrifice everything to regain it. But all was not well in Byzantium, for soon the first known pandemic of the Black Death would reap its hideous vengeance upon the world. And that's what we'll be talking about in our next video. It is one of the most wildest series of events in human history. It is certainly one of the most apocalyptic events in history, and it is one of the craziest that in human history as well. There is going to be a meteor that strikes the Earth. It is going to be followed by a year and a half in which the sun did not shine due to a effectively almost like a nuclear winter enveloped Western Europe. The sun does not produce light. People are starving to death because the crops can't grow. And then the plague comes to collect. It is a very unfortunate series of events. There's going to be a dragon. There's going to be demons. There's going to be a fake Jesus Christ who would rather wield a sword than use words of peace and tolerance. It was an incredibly crazy time. And we're going to talk about it in our next video. Hope you enjoyed this one. Hope you're looking forward to the next one. We'll do the Justinian Plague, and then we'll go on to the wildest of them all, the Black Death. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.